There is a short piece of writing from the beginning of the 12th century, written by a Chinese scholar who complains about the younger generation. He pretty much thinks that they are useless, and he writes 10 points to prove that. Complaining about the young or the next generation is one of the oldest traditions in human history. There are examples from Mesopotamia, ancient Greece, and many other places. And there are, of course, examples from China as well. This particular piece of writing comes from the turn of the 12th century, and it begins with this old scholar who says that he saw young people playing around on the marketplace dressed in nice clothes, and so he talked to them and told them that they should be concerned about real values and about improving themselves instead of just playing around wasting time. But evidently talking to these youngsters wasn't enough for him because he decided to write down 10 points of criticism. And here they are. Point number 1 is that in ancient times, people could not support themselves and had to study while working. By contrast, young people have plenty of food and have things to wear, and yet they do not study. Point number 2 is that in ancient times, people often had to travel long distances to be able to find a teacher. In contrast to young people who might have a teacher right in their own family or next door, and yet they do not study. Point number 3 is that in ancient times, people had to copy manuscripts with their own hands because there weren't enough books. Today, their house might be filled with books, and yet they do not read them. Point number 4 is that in ancient times, people studied from a very young age, and they spent 3 years on a single classic. But the young people of today do not start learning early. Instead, they waste away precious years. Point number 5 is that in ancient times, people gathered fireflies to be able to read at night, or read by the light reflected from snow. Today, young people can read very comfortably by the light of lanterns, and yet instead of reading, they amuse themselves with chit-chat and playing chess. Point number 6 is that in the past, there had been many people who could not see or could not hear well. As opposed to this, modern students may have very keen eyesight and acute hearing, and yet they do not have a clear vision of the direction in which they are going, so they might as well be blind and deaf. Point number 7 is that everybody used to have a proper place in society and a range of duties they had to perform. Today, young people have their parents work for them, or because of their family status, they are exempt from service. And yet, they still don't study, so they are the same as people with no status or no means. Point number 8 is that people used to suffer because of their background. Many of them never had a chance to read the book of poetry or the book of rites. Instead, they became farmers or gardeners, artisans or merchants. Today, lots of young people are born into good Confucian families, but they simply carry on their father's business without learning, and so they eventually crash. And point number 9 is people used to suffer because they had no place where they could cultivate themselves. And today's youngsters, they go to good schools and academies and parade around in their uniforms, calling themselves scholars. But in reality, they do not know a single classic, cannot compose a poem, and they are a disgrace to the sages of the past. And point number 10 is that there used to be a proper relationship and etiquette between lord and subject, father and son. And people really cared about values such as loyalty and filial piety, propriety and benevolence. But the students of our age are not concerned about these values anymore. It is as if they were using them to sweep the floor. So these are the 10 points of criticism towards the younger generation, the 10 Laments, and I think many of them are quite applicable today. In fact, some of these we were hearing from our parents and teachers when we were young, and you might be hearing the same from us today. Okay, I hope this was interesting. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.